I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. I've been thinking about this topic for a while and trying to figure out where this topic or conversation belonged. I have a large clinician group called the Confident Clinician, where I work with clinicians every month on developing evidence-based practice for integrative medicine and helping support them in their work. And then we have the Women's Health Unplugged podcast, where we're talking to women at a broader audience, clinicians and non-clinicians, but focused mostly on people accessing better information about their health, feeling more confident and in control and autonomous in their healthcare decisions. And so this conversation around, what I was trying to cheekily call the 3 worst pieces of business advice I've ever been given as a female entrepreneur, I didn't really know where it lived. Because I know I have lots of people that are listening that would benefit from this kind of conversation, because I think there's quite a few metaphors in the business advice that I've been given along the way that are really similar to the way that we think about or treat women and people in general, but also when we think about specifically with women's healthcare. And so even though I'm talking, partly to my clinicians, and there's a huge don't give up, don't put up with bullshit and believe in your dreams kind of aspect of this conversation when it comes to integrative practitioners, I also think that it's an important conversation to get out there, because where some of that advice was coming from was actually from people of authority, people who had credentials, people with positions at financial institutions that were maybe not always in my best interest. And I think that that's the parallels so beautifully some of the conversations we have about advocating for yourself in your healthcare. And so I actually think this conversation belongs perfectly here. So for context, integrative and naturopathic practice in Ontario or in Canada is not obviously funded by the provincial or any kind of national healthcare system. It's considered to be 100% privatized healthcare. Even though many patients have the benefit of having some of their costs offset by private health insurance, I would say the vast majority of the people that I work with don't have health insurance and are choosing to consume a different style of healthcare, or choosing to engage with a different level of support and coaching and or access to testing, etc., that falls outside of the very basic provincially funded healthcare system. And so that when you open a naturopathic practice, may be different than if you were a family doctor in Ontario. I would joke that maybe you could get away with practicing in the backseat of a car, and as long as you wrote your name on a little sticky note and said, Dr. So-and-so now in business, in theory, you would have people line up outside your car, because there is a shortage in demand and their accessibility is relatively good, meaning that it's covered by our provincial system. Is that when you open a privatized healthcare system, you are opening a small business, and not that practitioners who work under OHIP don't. They also own small businesses, which I do think we often forget. But truly, in every sense of the word, a naturopathic enterprise is a small business as well as a healthcare setting. And so, this was a very different kind of business undertaking, and even really one that was not well understood when I went to school. I wanted to help people. I love nutrition. I love preventative medicine. I love exercise. Nowhere along the way did I go like, I love accounting. I love keeping track of taxes. All the things that have to be done when you own a small business. None of that was my love. It still isn't my love. However, this is the part of what it takes to run a privatized healthcare business. And the lessons that I wanted to talk about partly have to do with that. So partly have to do with what it took and what it looked like to start a small business, but really like where the themes of this, worst financial advice I ever received came from was from not a place of me being my best self, moving myself forward, following my dreams, or even having the confidence that I was moving in the right direction. So when I graduated from school, my partner and I, my husband and I, both graduated from professional school at the exact same time. So he graduated as a dentist, and I think if you look at from the outside, you would maybe call that a very secure job, and truly, that's why he chose that. He came from, a very tumultuous upbringing financially, lots of fear and worry about what life looked like if you were an adult and didn't have a secure financial position. And so it was really a fear-based decision that he made to enter dentistry. Whereas I never really worried about money. And so for better or for worse, right? I'm not saying I never had to, I just never did. And I chose the naturopathic profession for very different reasons. I didn't really think about what kind of job I was going to get at the end. I just went because that's where I wanted to be. And then it was kind of like when I was staring down the student debt and all the things that you inherited by being a student. That was the first time that I really had to think about like, oh, like how does this work? Like how does we make this into a career actually? And that first piece of like very difficult, and worst, I'm saying worst in air quotes, although this one was the worst, piece of business advice that I ever received was actually at my husband's graduation. And so, all along the way, I had got to know lots of his colleagues and lots of his classmates. And at the graduation, there were also, people from the bank, because people from the bank really like dentists. And there was a particular bank that had been financing a lot of the continuing education for students up until that point, where they were sharing practice opportunities and talking about how to get your business off the ground and how to get a loan, how they'll finance your dream practice as a dentist. And I had the opportunity to be introduced to these individuals that were representing this major Canadian bank. And when they asked me what I did, when I said, well, actually, I'm graduating as well, and I'm graduating as a naturopathic doctor. And the person, the head person, who again, major Canadian bank, turned to me and said, you're going to be quite a tax burden on Sean here. You probably would do better by both of you if you didn't work at all. And that was my first piece of business advice that I received as a naturopathic doctor, was that I just shouldn't do it at all. And it's interesting because, in that moment, I was, surrounded by all these male dentists who were all graduating, and then all of these male people from the bank who had just insinuated that I had made the biggest mistake of my life, and that, rather than trying to work or follow my passion or do the things that I had just spent the last many years studying to do, it would be way better if I just stayed home and, I'm going to insert my own interpretation, make dinner and take care of my partner while he went to work, because he was really going to be the real breadwinner. And it's interesting because, I was driving to work one day last week, and for some reason that memory crossed my mind. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was because it's the anniversary of us moving into a larger facility, if it's the anniversary of us hiring a much larger clinical team to support the volume of people that we interact with on a weekly basis here at Clarity Health. I don't know if it's because it's spring and that's when we graduated. But for some reason, this memory sort of crossed my mind, and it made me think of women in general. It made me think of people who have been told that their ideas and their dreams aren't going to work. It made me think of how many times people are made to feel small even when there's no evidence that that's what, needed to happen. There was no thought about what my dreams, desires, capabilities, skills, all of that. Like none of that was thought into that conversation. And of course, all of Sean's friends like piped in being like, maybe she really wants to help people and maybe and that was lovely. Like that's nice that they all stepped in and supported me. But I think like that, and that was really it was only 13 years ago. So I know, yes, we've come a long way. And I think that maybe that same comment wouldn't necessarily land in this day and age. I hope not. Please, millennials, please don't let those kinds of conversations be happening at your graduation. But I do think it speaks to kind of this like bigger issue around how we support female entrepreneurs. And I know things are getting better, but these like small conversations are still happening. And when you see a person or woman who has overcome the odds, like they've overcome thousands and thousands of those kinds of comments to get where they are. And is that even really necessary that I needed to endure that kind of conversation, period, but also that's what everyone thought. And not everyone, but that was the landscape that was being painted for me, was that it was going to be expensive to put my kids in daycare, so I shouldn't try, right? That was the next time that exact same conversation came up, just in a slightly different way. That my role wasn't going to be to, take the bull by the horns and pursue this career with such vigor, because there was going to be this consequence to that, whether it was financial or it was going to be hard for my family or whether it was going to take me a lot of time. There was always this like underpinning of, well, why are you doing that? Because there's a softer, gentler, less risky way that you could be pursuing this goal instead. And I wanted to share that because I think that these conversations are happening often. I think that you're being exposed to these kinds of like undermining comments about not just your career, but your dreams, your choices, right? It's not that different than the person who says, like, oh, you never do pickup. Like, why? Oh, because you're always at the gym? Or, oh, you bought something for the bake sale? That's interesting. Or, oh, you missed the parent teacher interview because you were working, right? I think that there are examples of this, maybe not on such a huge scale, but there's examples of this experience happening in your life, and you're overcoming it. And that's wonderful and that's great. We shouldn't have to, right? We shouldn't have to endure that kind of nonsense in order for you to achieve your goals. And so I wanted to share it because I think sometimes, like, when we see good things happening with people, when we see like success and we see we see the end result, right? It's like I like that meme that's like, that overnight success that took like 1 billion years to accomplish. That sometimes we don't realize the level of challenge unless we start to have these conversations to say, like, yeah, you know what? The bank told me not to work. The bank told me that this profession was a mistake. The bank actually wouldn't give me a credit card to open my business when I asked for a credit card. And so I had to run my practice in the first year off of cash and my personal credit card. And so I want to share those pieces because I think there are probably people listening that have the potential to make someone else's story different than what mine was, or different than what ours was, right? If you're listening, you're like, yes, I had that too. Maybe now you're in a position where you can actually pay a woman what she's worth, reduce the barriers for her access to support for capital. Maybe you have the potential to educate women about how to manage her own investments, or get herself in a position where she's going to qualify for the kinds of loans and things that she needs to be able to move her world forward. Maybe you're listening and you actually have that opportunity to do that story differently for some other person. But I wanted you to hear that story because it struck me recently while I was driving to work. And for some reason I was like, I don't know why I've never shared that. I don't know why I've never talked about how on what was supposed to be my shining glory day where I was going to step out into the world and make a huge difference, someone told me I was going to be a tax burden on my husband. I don't know why never shared that story, but I do think there are parallels to that in our healthcare. I think when you want to get stronger and someone says, "Why would you do that? That's hard." I think when you want to keep looking for solutions and someone says, "I don't know why you would want to do that. We showed you the two best options over here, even though neither of them work for you." I think there are parallels of that where we're often not supporting you in your relentless pursuit of better in your life. And I think as a person of influence, whether I'm talking about me or I'm talking about you, we actually have the potential to change that story for others. And I think we can feel lifted up by hearing each other's stories. And so that's partly why I wanted to share that. So that was my number one worst piece of business advice that I've ever been given. Don't work. You're a tax burden on your husband. Which funnily, fast forward 13 years, and my husband has changed careers because he hated what he was doing. And I was able to help support him in that transition in his career so that he could pursue something that he loved by continuing to do what I love in a way that's, supports our family. So I think I've thought about that. I'm like, I feel like I should send that guy a letter and be like, "Hey, P.S. Not only did I make it, but I actually I'm doing such a great job that I allowed my husband to choose a passion-filled solution for his career as well," which I mean, he probably doesn't even remember who I was, to be honest. But I feel like that's that letter that I would love to write. The second worst piece of business advice that I've ever received was actually shortly after graduation. So, funnily, like they're all like at these times, like these very pivotal, influential times where I had to make a lot of decisions. The decisions seemed to really matter. And this decision specifically, I find kind of funny. And so my husband and I wanted to be, financially responsible when we graduated, and we had lots of student debt and wanted to figure out whether or not there were some strategies on how to, support that, overcoming that insurmountable, what it felt like was insurmountable student debt. If you're not aware, like becoming a dentist costs you like $150,000 in Ontario, and that's for like a resident of Ontario. If you're an international student or person, it's almost double that. And so you're leaving school with like a house, well, not a house nowadays, but you're leaving school with like this mortgage on your brain essentially. And so we wanted to chat with financial advisors about whether or not, like, how to manage that. Basically, we knew that we had domain expertise. This was not teeth. This was not integrative medicine. So let's talk to somebody about our finances. And the solution, or one of the recommendations that was made at that time that was really going to help improve our overall financial picture, was to move in with my parents. So when they looked at everything that was going on, we had been spending X amount per month on an apartment. We had this, we had that. And, as far as like expenses goes, and they were like, well, the fastest way for you to get out of student debt is to move in with Jordan's parents, live in the basement, and we can help eradicate that debt if you do that. And we funnily had just gone through a really like beautiful apartment in downtown Burlington. And it was completely not a financial decision if we were going to move into this apartment. It literally had to do with the fact that it was beautiful. It allowed us to keep only having one car. It was beside the lake. We could walk to the park. We had experienced 3 miscarriages before getting this apartment. And so we imagined ourselves getting a dog since we were pretty sure that we weren't going to be able to have kids. And we had just gone to look at this apartment, and it was like even more expensive than our stupid apartment in Toronto. But it was so beautiful. And it was going to give us this like beautiful space looking out over the water while I studied for my board exams and recovered from these miscarriages. And then we met with this, financial person that we absolutely trusted. And they were like, yeah, don't do that. You should live in your parents' basement. So needless to say, we actually didn't take the advice. But we'd struggled with it quite a bit, that we were like, oh my God, this is how people do it. This is what we're supposed to do. And, financially, yes, that is what made sense. The math was, go live in this windowless room, live with your parents, and probably ruin all of your relationships with each other. But in the bank, you will have you will save money because you will not be spending money on an apartment. And what's interesting is that how short-sighted that decision was. And so, yes, it was on paper going to give us a particular advantage, but the disadvantage of doing that choice meant, it's possible that my studying wouldn't have gone as well as it did. We wouldn't have gotten the dog, and the dog was the thing that probably led to my stress reduction and supported us falling pregnant and staying pregnant very shortly after. The quality of life that we gained from living in this beautiful apartment. We walked, we biked. I started running, which I then subsequently quit and I haven't resumed. But obviously, I felt pretty happy and positive if I was going to start running. The quality of life that it afforded us. I could take the bus, right? We didn't have to get a second car. I took a bus to McMaster to teach. I was able to walk to the first 2 clinics that I worked at, actually, because of this location that we lived at. It was such a quality of life enhancement. And even though on paper, the finances that were going out the door to support this incredibly pivotal quality of life component, the unspoken benefit or the unseen benefit that really did translate into better quality of life, better probably less spending, right? I joke, I'm like, well, what's my therapy budget if I live in my parents' basement, right? I think sometimes we are told what the most obvious solution is, the most obvious on paper solution is, without thinking about the impact that has on our overall well-being. And as an entrepreneur, I know very well that if I haven't slept, the following day sucks. And I don't show up as my best self, and I can't give my most, and I don't provide the level of support and service and empathy and the vessel of listening and all the things that it takes for people to have that wonderful experience when we work together. That's just legitimately not possible if I live in my parents' basement. It just isn't. The choice I had to make was to invest in an environment that actually propelled me forward as a human being, rather than looking solely at the silo of what financially makes the most sense here, Jordan. And so, and there's maybe some financial advisors that are listening that are cringing at going, you spent what on an apartment that was how small? However, I see it as a micro of the macro, right? Quite often we do get we look at that logical on paper decision without looking at how your environment, how the investment in your environment influences your ability to show up in your own life. So what if we were saving some money? So what? What are we doing this all for if it's to live in my parents' basement so that we got rid of our student debt faster? I truly don't believe I would have had the capacity to write university courses and get excited about the work I was doing and maybe even conceive and carry to term, because that all happened in that apartment. Get the dog, the things that really catapulted my life forward, I don't think would have been possible if I hadn't invested in the quality of life component that I invested in. So yes, financially, stupid decision to rent an apartment on the lake. But when we look at the big ecosystem of our lives, it's not always the most on paper logical decision that actually is the best advice for you, right? Buying a beautiful water bottle might help you drink more water than using a plastic crappy water bottle. Is that better? Is that net positive, right? If you invest a little bit in your health, working with someone on your nutrition, right? In the short term, on paper, doesn't make sense. Go Google it. Sure, I'm sure you could figure it out if you spend 1,000,000 hours figuring it out yourself, right? But the return on the investment of being supported and surrounding yourself with people and things and the environment that actually catapults yourself forward, you're putting yourself in a position of success and possibility. But you're not doing that if we're always sort of looking at that very short-sighted, non-investment style thinking about our health. And so that it also makes me think about health, because it's a very common parallel where, we sort of try and pinch pennies emotionally, we pinch pennies financially. We would rather waste our time than spend our money in so many ways, when really what that's doing is that's maybe not putting you in an environment that's going to move you forward or catapult you forward. That maybe at the end of the day, you have a couple extra bucks to rub together, but you're actually not setting yourself up for the kind of success that you're hoping to have. And so that was the one of the worst pieces of business advice that we ever got that we didn't listen to. So now I'm 2 for 2 on listening. And then the last one was about valuing your time. So it's interesting because, I mean, healthcare is like one-on-one healthcare is remarkably expensive. And that's something that, we don't talk enough about. I think that's where the advent of group program is so valuable because so often in that one-on-one format, we're talking about things that we talked about with the person who was ahead of you, actually, and kind of just put you both in the same room and said the same thing. And actually, truthfully, you probably would learn something from each other if we did it in that way as well. But typically, healthcare is consumed in this like one-on-one format, and it is monstrously expensive to support the infrastructure that it takes to see patients one-on-one. And I remember as the pandemic was, slugging along, and we were really coming to realize that many of the changes in our operations were here to stay, right? And I think lots of businesses have hit that turning point where they're like, actually, it takes 10 times the amount of cleaning and disinfecting equipment that it ever has. Actually, we can't have as many people work at the same time. Actually, right? We can't seat as many people as we used to. Actually, there's a supply chain issue with a lot of the things that we used to sell. And we've seen this like rise in cost of the delivery of lots of services, and healthcare is really no different. It's still the same one person that's trying to deliver your care one-on-one, and yet the available resources to do that has changed. And talking about the, rates and how to establish what the actual cost of healthcare is, and having a quick discussion about it and some of the things that I knew that needed to change in our world of looking at how we prioritize group programming and prioritize en masse education, things like Bulletproof Your 40s and Fundamentals of Macronutrients, which are all programs that we've created to help alleviate this challenge. And the person that I was, bouncing these ideas off of around what my expertise brings, how much benefit I can bring patients when I work with them in an hour, and what that looks like for them on the trajectory of their health, and what we are saving them as far as what we call morbidity, which that word is not the same as mortality. Morbidity is like how affected you are by your condition. How many lost work days, how many missed opportunities you have because of your medical condition, that we are like dramatically changing the impact of someone's, say, menopause or perimenopause on their life, and how valuable is that actually to them. And as I was talking about this and trying to establish how we look at the value of certain things that we offer, things like programming and things like one-on-one care. And I realized the person that I was having that conversation with actually didn't value their time or didn't value like their expertise. And when I started talking about the cost of delivery of care and how much more supportive we can be to patients if we see them more frequently and support them in different ways, that person's immediate response was like, well, Jordan, no one's going to pay you for that. No one's going to pay for that, actually. I think everyone would find that too expensive. And it was interesting because, and I love those quotes where it's like, don't take advice from people who would never take your risks. Don't take advice from people who have never done what you're doing. Is that we're often taking advice around our own value from people who don't value themselves, right? We're taking advice about our health from people who don't put their health at the top of the priority list. We are listening to people whose would never walk a mile in our shoes. And so how are we using that information effectively to then decide our worth and decide what we do and what we bring to the table, what our health is worth, how we should invest our time, how we should prioritize our things, when those people just don't actually believe that for themselves. And so it's going to skew the advice you get. So this, third piece of worst business advice I ever received was like, well, don't charge your worth, Jordan, because that's not how I feel about my worth. And when I say it that way, like, it's so easy to be like, well, obs, Jordan, don't don't listen. Like if that person doesn't understand what they bring to the table, then they're never going to be able to help you contextualize what you bring to the table. But I do think on a subtle level, we do this often, right? And it's whether you're talking about the worth of your healthcare or the worth of your time or the worth of your emotional bandwidth, is that we're quite often having mirrored back to us something that we don't desire, right? The people that are mirroring back to us about what they do. And, there's a funny quote that's like, we would rather be the same than right? So if all of your friends drink wine and don't go for walks, like even if we know that that's not the best thing for us, we actually would just rather be the same as them than have to stand out and do the opposite. And so when we're looking at that kind of advice around your health, whether it's health or business or even just trying to be a better human, are you asking people for advice that are actually able to reflect back to you the kind of growth and potential that you see in yourself? When I think back to like all three of these business advice, so don't work, Jordan, you're a tax burden to your husband. Move in with your parents because that's that's your quality of life doesn't matter. And you're not worth what you think you're worth. So there. They're all incredibly fear-based decisions, right? It's all coming from the fear of the people I was talking to. It wasn't my fear. And thank goodness I had the wherewithal to be like, yeah, that's not cool. That's not right. That's not in my best interest. But it's also made me reflect on the number of times that I didn't feel strong enough to feel or think that way, where I did see my self-worth reflected in what someone else thought about themselves or their business or their offerings, where I did make a short-sighted decision rather than thinking about my quality of life because that just seemed like the obvious thing to do. Or where I did listen to someone say, you can or can't do this because, you're a naturopath or because you work in healthcare or because you're a woman entrepreneur. There's been many times. So even though those three worst pieces of business advice I've ever received, I overcame, I can probably think of thousands of examples of times where I didn't. And I think, when you're on the outside, trying to look in, we don't always share these, deep, hard female entrepreneur moments to remind each other that A, a lot of this is not okay, and B, that it's okay if you are going to take a path that's less traveled. There's actually a lot of women doing it. Let's start sharing what that looks like. Let's start sharing what it looks like to fucking bust it out of work to get your kids from daycare so that you can pursue your dream, your day job dream. Let's normalize that sometimes we're staying up late and not connecting with a partner because we have a dream that we needed a couple of extra hours in order to achieve. Let's normalize that sometimes we're going to miss those parent-teacher interviews, or our kid's going to be late for the birthday party, or we're not going to bake something for the bake sale because we have our own ambitions and goals. And our role in our lives, number one, is to serve our higher purpose. And we can actually do much better things for our family if we satisfy all of those things first. So I feel like I went on a massive tangent, and I had loosely formed thoughts about what I wanted to talk about this week. And partly it's coming from that sort of happy anniversary. I've been in practice since 2008. But thinking about like all of those parts of the story that haven't really been told and wanting to share that with a bigger audience to be like, you know what? Like there's a lot, we've all endured a lot of things. I think we can learn from each other's experiences. And the next time someone tells you that you're a tax burden on your partner, like give them one for me, like a big middle finger. And because I want you to know that those that's not okay. And I know you know that. I think it's that like recognition that if we all stand up for those things, we're all moving the needle forward, and we're doing good things for each other by sharing, and we're doing good things for each other by not tolerating mediocrity, because that's not what any of us are here for, actually. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice. nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.